The city streets were alive with movement. Cars rushing by, people glued to their phones, and the never-ending hum of distant conversations. Amid the chaos, a young girl named Lily walked with slow, measured steps, gripping a single-dollar bill in her pocket. It was her last dollar, and she knew exactly what it meant. Lily was no stranger to struggle. At just 17, she had learned how cruel life could be. Her father had passed away years ago, and her mother, despite working multiple jobs, barely managed to keep them afloat. Every penny mattered. This dollar in her pocket was supposed to buy her something small, maybe a snack to keep her stomach from growling. But as she turned the corner onto the familiar street leading home, her eyes landed on someone she had seen many times before. An old homeless man sat on the cold pavement, his clothes worn, his hands trembling slightly from the chill in the air. His name was Thomas, or at least that's what the few kind strangers who spoke to him called him. He had been sitting in that same spot for months, always with a tired smile, always with a look of quiet resignation. Lily hesitated. She had passed by him many times before. Some days, she saw others drop a few coins in his cup. Other days, he sat there unnoticed, blending into the background of a city too busy to care. Today, he looked especially weary, as if the weight of the world had pressed even harder onto his frail shoulders. She reached into her pocket, feeling the soft edges of the dollar bill. It wasn't much, but to her it was everything. "Excuse me," she said softly, stepping forward. Thomas looked up, his tired eyes meeting hers. She extended her hand, the dollar between her fingers. "Here, take this." For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then, slowly, a tear welled in his eye. "Are you sure, miss?" His voice was rough, as though he hadn't spoken in days. Lily nodded. "Yeah, it's not much, but I hope it helps." Thomas took the dollar, his hand shaking slightly. "Thank you," he whispered. Lily smiled and turned to leave. She had no idea that this small act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. Lily walked away, her heart feeling strangely light despite having just given away her last dollar. It wasn't much, but something about the way Thomas had looked at her, his gratitude so raw and real, made her feel like she had done something that truly mattered. As she continued down the road, the weight of her own struggles crept back in. Her stomach ached with hunger, reminding her that she now had nothing left for herself. She sighed, shaking her head. It didn't matter. She had made her choice. Lily lived in a tiny apartment with her mother, Sarah. Their home wasn't much, just a cramped one-bedroom space with secondhand furniture and flickering lights that never seemed to get fixed. Her mother worked double shifts at a diner, doing everything she could to keep them afloat. Lily, still in high school, did her best to help where she could, taking odd jobs, tutoring younger kids, but money was always tight. When she stepped inside, she found her mother at the small kitchen table, counting crumpled bills with a tired expression. Sarah looked up and forced a smile. "You're home early." "Yeah, I took a shortcut." Lily set her school bag down and hesitated. She thought about telling her mother about Thomas, about the dollar she had given away, but something held her back. She knew what her mother would say, that every cent mattered, that they couldn't afford to give when they barely had enough for themselves. Instead, she changed the subject. "Do we have anything to eat?" Sarah sighed, rubbing her forehead. "I was going to pick something up after work tomorrow. We have some bread left." Lily nodded and walked over to grab a slice. It was dry and slightly stale, but she didn't complain. Meanwhile, back on the cold sidewalk, Thomas clutched the dollar Lily had given him, staring at it as if it were something sacred. People had tossed change into his cup before, some with a polite nod, others without even looking at him. But this had been different. This girl had given him her last dollar. He had seen it in her eyes. She hadn't done it because she had extra to spare. She had done it because she cared. With a deep breath, Thomas pushed himself up from the ground. He needed to use this wisely. He walked toward the nearest convenience store, his joints aching with every step. When he entered, the bright lights stung his eyes for a moment, and the cashier barely glanced at him. He browsed the shelves, looking at what a single dollar could get him. A bottle of water? A small pack of crackers? Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something that made him freeze. A scratch-off lottery ticket. He hesitated. It was a foolish idea, wasn't it? He could get food instead. But something in his gut told him to take the risk. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was fate. With a deep breath, he took the ticket to the counter. "One of these, please." The cashier looked at him for a second before taking the bill and handing him the ticket. Thomas stepped outside, his fingers trembling as he scratched away at the silver coating. At first, he thought he had made a mistake. The number seemed random, meaningless. Then his eyes widened. His breath hitched. No, it couldn't be. He had won, and not just a few dollars. It was the jackpot. Thomas stood frozen on the sidewalk, his eyes locked onto the ticket in his trembling hands. His heart pounded in his chest as he read the numbers again and again, making sure he wasn't imagining it. The neon glow of the convenience store sign flickered above him, casting a surreal light over the moment. He had won. Not a few dollars. Not a small prize. Millions. His breath came in shallow gasps as he tried to process the reality of what had just happened. For years, he had lived with nothing, barely surviving each day. He had long given up hope that his life could ever change. Yet now, with just $1, a dollar given to him by a girl who had almost nothing herself, everything was different. But what should he do next? His mind raced. He needed to claim the winnings, but the thought of walking into the lottery office looking like this, ragged, unshaven, wearing clothes that hadn't been washed in weeks, made his stomach twist. Would they even take him seriously? Would they assume he had stolen the ticket? Thomas took a deep breath. No, this was real. This was his chance. The next morning, after spending the night at a homeless shelter, he used a few leftover coins he had to buy a cheap prepaid phone. With shaking hands, he dialed the lottery office. "Hello, this is the State Lottery Commission. How can we help you?" I think I just won the jackpot," he stammered. There was a pause before the voice on the other end replied, "Congratulations. Do you have your ticket with you?" "Yes. Please bring it to our main office for verification. You'll need a valid ID as well." Thomas's stomach dropped. A valid ID. He had nothing, not even an old driver's license. Years on the streets had left him without any form of identification. He hung up, his mind spinning. He needed help. Someone who could vouch for him. Someone who wouldn't look at him like he was crazy. And then he thought of her. The girl with the kind eyes. The girl who had given him her last dollar. Lily. Meanwhile, Lily's morning started just like any other. She woke up early, helped her mother with a few chores, and grabbed her worn-out backpack for school. Her stomach still grumbled from the lack of dinner the night before, but she pushed the thought aside. As she walked down the same street where she had met Thomas, she was surprised to find his usual spot empty. He wasn't there. His old cardboard sign was gone, and there was no sign of his tattered belongings. Had something happened to him? She felt a pang of worry, but shook it off. Maybe he had found a shelter for the night. Or maybe her dollar had actually helped him in some way. Lily had no idea just how true that was. Hours later, as she sat in class, lost in thought, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She frowned. Hardly anyone texted her, except her mom. But when she pulled out the old phone and looked at the screen, an unfamiliar number flashed across it. She hesitated before answering. "Hello." A rough yet familiar voice spoke on the other end. "Lily? It's Thomas." She blinked, sitting up straighter. "Thomas? How did you get my number?" "I asked around. The lady at the bakery down the street knew your name. I hope you don't mind." "No, it's okay. Are you all right?" There was a pause before he spoke again, his voice thick with emotion. "Lily, something incredible has happened. I need to see you." She could hear the urgency in his voice, and her curiosity spiked. "Okay. Where? Can you meet me at the park near the library?" "I'll be there." After school, Lily hurried to the park, her heart racing with anticipation. As she approached the benches, she spotted Thomas, but he looked completely different. He had cleaned up, wearing a simple but fresh set of clothes. His hair had been trimmed, and for the first time, he stood tall with a renewed energy in his posture. Lily stared in disbelief. "Thomas?" He smiled, his eyes bright with something she hadn't seen before, hope. "You changed my life," he said. Lily frowned. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath and reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. As he handed it to her, her hands trembled slightly. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the words. Her breath caught in her throat. Lottery winner. Millions of dollars. She looked up at him, stunned. You won? He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. With the dollar you gave me? Lily couldn't speak. The world around her seemed to blur as the weight of the moment settled in. She had given him her last dollar, never expecting anything in return. And now, standing before her was a man whose entire life had just been transformed because of that single act of kindness. Lily's hands trembled as she held the paper, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The numbers, the confirmation, the reality of it. It was overwhelming. You really won? She whispered, glancing up at Thomas. He nodded, his expression filled with emotion. I still can't believe it myself. He let out a shaky laugh. All this time, I thought my life would never change, that I'd always be just another homeless man on the street. But then he stopped, swallowing hard. You gave me your last dollar. You had nothing, and yet you still chose to help me. Lily's chest tightened. She hadn't done it expecting anything in return. She had just seen someone in need and acted. But now, what are you going to do? She asked softly. Thomas took a deep breath. I need to claim the money, but I don't have an ID. That's where I need your help. Lily frowned. How can I help with that? I need someone to vouch for me. Someone who can help me get the documents I need. I've been to a shelter, and they connected me with a social worker who can help me get an ID, but it takes time. If you could come with me, it would mean a lot. Lily hesitated. She wanted to help, but this was so much bigger than anything she had ever dealt with. Still, she saw something in Thomas's eyes, something she hadn't seen before. Hope, determination, a future. She nodded. Of course I'll help. Together, they made their way to the local shelter, where Thomas introduced her to a woman named Claire, a caseworker who had been assisting him. Claire explained the process, how they needed to track down Thomas's old records, verify his identity, and get him the necessary documents to claim his winnings. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was possible. Days passed, and Lily stood by Thomas's side through every step. She helped him gather paperwork, accompanied him to offices, and reassured him whenever doubt crept in. One evening, as they sat outside the shelter, Thomas turned to her. I don't know how I can ever repay you, Lily. She smiled. You don't have to. You deserve this. Thomas shook his head. No, this wouldn't have happened without you. A week later, with his new ID finally in hand, Thomas walked into the lottery office. Lily sat anxiously in the waiting area, watching as he presented his ticket and identification to the officials. Minutes felt like hours. Then, finally, he emerged, his eyes shining with disbelief. It's done, he said breathlessly. They're processing everything. Lily jumped up, hugging him tightly. I'm so happy for you. Tears burned in Thomas's eyes as he pulled back. This is just the beginning. And Lily, I want to change your life too. Lily frowned. What do you mean? He took a deep breath. You gave me your last dollar when you had nothing. Now I want to give you something in return. I don't want you and your mom to struggle anymore. Lily's eyes widened. Thomas, you don't have to. I do. His voice was firm. Not because I owe you, but because I want to. Because no one has ever shown me kindness like you did. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes. She had never expected anything. She had only done what she thought was right. But now, her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. Thomas wasted no time. As soon as his winnings were officially processed, he set his plan into motion. The first thing he did was find a place to stay, a modest but comfortable apartment where he could finally sleep in a real bed, free from the cold streets he had known for so long. But his thoughts kept drifting back to Lily. He couldn't forget the way she had selflessly given her last dollar to him, not knowing what it would lead to. She had changed his life, and now it was his turn to do the same for her. The next morning he called her. Meet me at the diner on 5th Street, he said. Lily, confused but curious, agreed. When she arrived, she was surprised to see Thomas sitting inside, looking completely different from the man she had met just a few weeks ago. He was dressed in a clean, well-fitted jacket, his face freshly shaved, and his posture no longer slouched with defeat. You look amazing, she said, smiling. Thomas chuckled. It's amazing what a little hope can do. Lily sat across from him. So, what's this about? He took a deep breath. I meant what I said before, Lily. I want to help you and your mom. Lily's smile faltered. Thomas, I appreciate it, but we don't expect anything from you. You don't owe us anything. He shook his head. This isn't about owing. It's about gratitude. It's about kindness. You gave to me without expecting anything in return, and that's why I want to do this. Please let me. She hesitated. What exactly are you thinking? Thomas reached into his pocket and slid an envelope across the table. Open it. Lily's hands shook as she tore it open. Inside was a check, one with more zeros than she had ever seen in her life. Her breath caught. Thomas, this is too much. He smiled gently. It's enough to get you and your mom out of that tiny apartment, enough to pay off your debts, enough to make sure you can go to college without worrying about money. It's not charity, Lily. It's a thank you. Tears welled up in her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he said simply. A sob broke from Lily's throat as she threw her arms around him. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. As she pulled away, she looked at him with teary eyes. What are you going to do next? Thomas smiled. I've been thinking about that. I don't just want to use this money for myself. I want to help others, people like me, who just need one chance, one act of kindness to turn their lives around. Lily's heart swelled with pride. You're going to change so many lives. He nodded, and it all started with $1. In the weeks that followed, everything changed for both Thomas and Lily. With the money he had won, Thomas didn't just rebuild his own life. He dedicated himself to helping others who were still trapped in the cycle of homelessness. He partnered with shelters, funded job training programs, and even bought an old building that he planned to turn into a transitional home for people in need. Word of his story spread quickly. News stations picked it up, calling it a miracle, a testament to how one small act of kindness could change everything. But for Thomas, the real miracle wasn't the money. It was Lily. She had believed in him when no one else had. She had given when she had nothing. And because of her, he had found a new purpose. Lily, too, saw her life take an incredible turn. She and her mother moved into a comfortable home, free from the worries that had weighed them down for years. For the first time, she was able to focus on her studies without wondering if they would make rent that month. One day, she visited Thomas at the shelter he was helping renovate. She found him working alongside volunteers, painting the walls of what would soon be a safe haven for those in need. She smiled watching him. You know, she said, stepping closer, I still can't believe this all started because of $1. Thomas set his paintbrush down and turned to her. It wasn't just $1, Lily. It was what it meant. It meant hope. It meant kindness. It meant someone still believed in me. She felt tears prick her eyes. I didn't do much. He shook his head. You did everything. She looked around at the shelter, at the volunteers, at the new beginning he was creating not just for himself, but for so many others. You're incredible, Thomas. He smiled. So are you. As they stood there, surrounded by the echoes of hammers and laughter, they both knew that this was just the beginning. A single act of kindness had created a ripple effect, changing not just one life, but countless others. And in the end, that was the real magic of it all.